and gave me great models of how to be a good teacher and to be persuasive. But I found most valuable the philosophy they taught about life as something that has the meaning we decide to give it. My last thematic thread is hidden wisdom, and that's one that continues. Let me backtrack some. For a young boy, Mormonism has a lot of cool ideas in it that sound like science fiction. Other worlds, God living in the Kolob solar system, and God creating the world by scientific means. And actually, that's part of Mormonism actually making a claim to be true like science is true, which ended up being important in many ways to my life. It's not, at any rate, it's not an accident that Utah is a mecca for science fiction. I had the sense growing up that there were endless things to be learned and discovered in Mormonism. As a teenager, I was also fascinated by the work of Hugh Nibley, who managed to read Mormonism into ancient documents, including Egyptian papyri. That was heady stuff. I later dated Hugh Nibley's daughter, Martha Nibley, briefly but intensely before she went on to marry my friend John Beck, write several bestsellers, and write a column in Oprah's magazine. If you want to know anything about her, that's easy for you to find. She has the same kind of freewheeling, somewhat untethered intellectual creativity that her father had. When I arrived at college, I realized that my classmates knew so little about Mormonism that Mormonism to them was whatever I told them it was. So without stretching things too much, I tried hard to make my account of Mormonism as attractive and as consistent with scientific and historical facts as I could. Later on, in my 30s, every other week I got together with a group of Mormon men who were by and large quite skeptical of Mormonism. And Gary's actually here with you today, so he had a major influence on me. At first, I imagined myself to be a missionary to these skeptics and continued my efforts to give an attractive account of Mormonism consistent with scientific and historical facts. Could this possibly be God's great mission that he'd sent me on? But over time, we exhaustively discussed the relationship of Mormonism to every relevant scientific and historical fact we could think of, not to mention many current events as Mormon leaders showed very graphically the hierarchical nature of the church and in suppressing gays, feminists, and intellectuals. In order to continue to make sense of Mormonism, I had to gradually modify my idea of Mormonism, but I was still able to believe. During this same time, I was happily teaching an adult Sunday school class in the Mormon church, as well as periodically teaching some of the adult men in what was called a priesthood meeting. The modified version of Mormonism I'd come up with crept into this teaching, but even more, I delighted in letting those who came to my Sunday school class talk freely about what they thought and their concerns, including Mormonism's unequal treatment of women, which was a frequent topic. By the time I was almost 30, by the time I was almost 40, local Mormon leaders had stopped me from teaching Sunday school and finally stopped me from teaching in priesthood meeting as well. To put it bluntly, I felt I could defend Mormonism in the face of scientific and historical and social issues, but by the time I'd modified Mormonism enough to feel good about defending it, many other Mormons didn't recognize it as Mormonism anymore. So I'm not sure if I ever left Mormonism, but they left me. But actually I did later on, because after that, I'll say it in a minute. But one of the luckiest things in my life is that while different in its details, my wife Gail's religious journey and my religious journeys were synchronized well enough that we left Mormonism together in 2000. At that time, I began my association with Unitarian Universalism. It's nice to be able to be myself and say what I think without fear in Unitarian Universalism. In fact, my therapist was surprised when I told him I was coming to give a sermon, and he said, "Are they okay with you talking about the fact that you're an atheist?" And of course, but only here, not very many places. It's very rare. Psychologically, leaving Mormonism was quite wrenching. I had to rethink a lot of things. For one thing, without any need to try to make sense of Mormonism anymore, I decided in fairly short order that I didn't believe in God. So at that point, I think I really did leave Mormonism. Nowadays, sometimes I jokingly say, I'm okay with, I like Mormonism just fine except for the God part. And of course I'm including the hierarchical nature as having to do with God, because it's the whole idea that they are the emissaries of God that makes it so hierarchical. Not believing in God made it hard to believe in an afterlife either, which was a real blow. Like most Americans, I'd assumed I'd go to heaven, so nothingness after death was a great come down. I grieved the afterlife I now believed I would never have. After the difficult adjustments of leaving Mormonism, my spiritual life has revolved around my men's circle in the First Unitarian Universalist Congregation of Ann Arbor, my annual visits here, my study of happiness as an economist, my psychotherapy, and continuing to wrestle with the reality of death. I'm not a fan of death. I'm sometimes surprised to hear people try to give an apologia for death, but I just think it's a bad thing. But anyway, I try to face the facts anyway. And that's been one of my mottos this past year, trying to face all the different facts and leaving till later the question of what I'm going to do with them, but to face them at any rate. So if I look back, besides the double-edged sword of ambition and the irrational sense I still have a personal genie watching out for me, two big legacies of my experience in Mormonism are the desire for hidden wisdom and the love of talking about religion. At this point, I don't think I know what religion is all about. Most of the time these days, I think of religion as a grab bag of many different things, some incredibly valuable and some utterly worthless or even harmful. But if we can sort through the items in the bag carefully enough, we can keep the good and throw away the bad. I believe that if we talk to one another about our views on each item in the bag, we can do a better job of sorting than if we try to do our sorting alone. Each person's spiritual autobiography can give us extra insight in that task. Thank you for giving me this chance to share mine.